Okay, now let's go on to the other breaking news story tonight. And this gets very alarming. That as early as, I think, December 21st or 23rd, I forget the exact date, I read your article, that in fact, multiple warnings, intelligence was saying that there were groups, radical groups out there planning to riot on January the 6th, and they were ignored completely?
Yeah, absolutely. So FBI, Homeland Security, U.S. Marshals Service, and the Metropolitan Police Department all provided the Capitol Police with extensive, detailed information they were intercepting through their sources of people planning to go to the January 6th rally and cause trouble, attack members of Congress, storm the Capitol. That's an exact word from the intelligence reports. All of that is gathered up by the Intelligence Division of the Capitol Police, and it's disseminated to the leadership and other people, and then nothing happens. In fact, the final plans for January 6th, I mean, all these documents are on Just the News now. You can go see them. Actually says there was no threat analysis, no known threat analysis, a complete lie. But here's the most important thing. A whistleblower has stepped forward. His name is Eric Orr. He's a decorated military veteran. He is an intelligence analyst. He was one of the best that the Capitol Police have. He now works for the Homeland Security Department. He's so trusted. He says that he wrote a memo. Actually, we have the memo. On January 9th, 3 days after the terrible riots occurred, he wrote a memo to all his bosses saying, listen, there's no way to sugarcoat this. We knew in advance of all of this intelligence, and we didn't act on it. We failed. We've got to learn from it. We can't cover it up. There's no way to spin this other than we had an opportunity to stop. And he talks about how nauseous he was, knowing that his fellow officers went out there on January 6th completely blind to the intelligence he provided his bosses. This is a devastating whistleblower. I have confirmed he is working with Capitol Hill Republicans, House Republicans, working on the House Administration Committee, Rep. Rodney Davis. They've interviewed him and several other whistleblowers. If Republicans get control of Congress next year, an entirely different story about Nancy Pelosi's preparations for January 6th is going to burst onto the scene tonight. People get to see the first part of it, the actual whistleblower's memos to his bosses 3 days after January 6th, and all the intelligence he provided going back to December 21st, 2020.
And we expect that the Capitol Police chief, who had requested the guard, he's coming out with a book, and that's supposed to be equally as explosive?
I've heard those reports. I haven't been able to confirm it, but I've heard that he's been writing on a book or some sort of a long expose on what he knows. But the documents that are out tonight are going to irrefutably show, one, Capitol Police had plenty of warnings, specific, detailed, extensive, nonstop warnings. And when they got their police department ready for January 6th, they left all that intelligence out. I encourage everybody to go take a look at the riot.
Or wherever you want.
An opportunity to stop. And he talks about tonight, people get to see the first part of it, the actual whistleblower's memos to his bosses 3 days after January 6th, and all the intelligence he provided going back to December 21st, 2020.
And we expect that the Capitol Police chief, who had requested the guard, he's coming out with a book, and that's supposed to be equally as explosive?
I've heard those reports. I haven't been able to confirm it, but I've heard that he's been writing on a book or some sort of a long expose on what he knows. But the documents that are out tonight are going to irrefutably show, one, Capitol Police had plenty of warnings, specific, detailed, extensive, nonstop warnings. And when they got their police department ready for January 6th, they left all that intelligence out. I encourage everybody to go take a look at the riot unit document, the document they gave the riot control units. It says there was no threat analysis at all. That is simply not true from the documents we made public tonight. Eric Orr, remember that name. He's going to be a very important witness in the next year in Congress.
All right, John Solomon, thank you for those reports. We appreciate it.
Last night, we broke a big story in the Capitol Police's own internal report assigning blame for the widespread security and intelligence failures that occurred on January 6th. That's something that the Democrats tomorrow night are not going to want to talk about because House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is the mayor of the Capitol. It was her job to keep it safe that day. But somebody who's been digging into that issue relentlessly is Congressman Rodney Davis, a ranking member of the House Administration Committee. And he's here to join us now for a discussion. Congressman, great to have you on the show again.
Great to be back on with you, John and Amanda. I appreciate it.
You have been one of the most focused persons in all of Congress, going all the way back to 17. You were really harping on, does the Capitol Police have the right posture? You're asking these hard questions. January 6th occurs. Now Democrats only want to talk about Donald Trump, Donald Trump, Donald Trump. There's a whole security scenario here that doesn't seem really well addressed. Do members like you feel well protected even after January 6th, or do you fear that the lessons haven't been learned?
Look, I will tell you, I don't think we're in a better security posture than we were leading up to January 6th. I think that's a direct failure of Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats from addressing some of the security failures that happened that day. Do I feel protected on the campus? I do. The Capitol Police, the brave men and women in the Capitol Police, they saved my life on a baseball field almost 5 years ago and the lives of so many of my colleagues. They're my heroes for doing that, but they were put in a terrible position because of politics and because of optics, and that was done by the person who controls the security apparatus on the Capitol, and that is Nancy Pelosi.
All right.
Congressman, it's shocking to read this report. We're a year and a half post these problems, but I have to think that some of these problems were known before the fact. But nonetheless, Speaker Pelosi continues to assert that she has nothing to do with the security of the Capitol. Is that true?
That is absolutely demonstrably false. The Speaker and her team, through testimony that we've seen in investigations that were done by the Senate Rules Committee immediately after January 6th, the Speaker and her team, we have evidence that they've controlled the security making decisions here in the Capitol complex long before January 6th. And frankly, these are things that need to change to really protect the Capitol and to really protect our brave men and women in the Capitol Police. We need to make sure we take the politics out of these security decisions that really put them in a bad situation on January 6th, John and Amanda.
Yeah, I think that's the most amazing takeaway when you read that after action report that the police did on itself. Forget all the political documents that have come out. This is the police department's own expert assessment, and they see things like the equipment's outdated. They can't talk by radios. The doors to the chambers don't lock. The elevator that goes to the sensitive fourth floor is left insecure. We're 20 years after 9/11. How can a department with $600 million of resources a year be that ill-prepared to protect one of the most important institutions in our country?
You know, John and Amanda, those are the questions that we need to answer. And the Democrats who are in charge of the House are failing miserably on using their oversight responsibility, our oversight responsibility, to ask those questions. Instead, they've gone on this political witch hunt, this select committee. The select committee became a political circus when Nancy Pelosi made the unprecedented decision to actually not seat two members, Jim Jordan and Jim Banks, of the original members that were named by Leader McCarthy. I was one of those members. We could have had a balanced debate. We could have had a more balanced approach. But instead, the Speaker chose to make this about politics. And that's what the American people are going to see tomorrow. But they need to know. They need to know that they have to dig into these reports that you have been reporting about. These are recommendations made by the police, made by the people who are in charge of the security apparatus. And they're not being implemented because of politics and because of a lack of leadership from Speaker Pelosi.
Yeah, and Congressman, I hate to make this all about Nancy Pelosi, but as John was talking about at the top of the show, the security threat with respect to Justice Kavanaugh, you've been one of the folks very vocal in pushing Nancy Pelosi to bring to the floor a vote to have police protection for folks like Justice Kavanaugh. Your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. What we saw with Justice Kavanaugh brought back memories of the crazed liberal shooter who was screaming healthcare while he was firing at me and my friends on a baseball field. This liberal nut job who decided that he was going to settle his political differences by bringing firearms to Justice Kavanaugh's house. That's somebody who needs to be charged to the highest extent. Look, we're public officials. We get threats. But the bottom line is those threats need to be adjudicated. I had someone who thought it was a great idea to threaten to blow my head off one day on a voicemail. He now has a felony on his record because he was prosecuted. And you know how many times I've been threatened since then? Zero. So holding people accountable matters. And I certainly hope the DOJ is going to take their job seriously and hold this individual accountable to the highest extent to make sure that that does not happen again to any Supreme Court justice or any official nationwide.
Yeah, so important that we get this right. So tomorrow night, the Democrats have already tipped their hand. They went out and hired a Hollywood producer. They're going to put on a show. There doesn't seem to be a lot of facts that are going to back up the show, but there's one question behind their argument that I can't reconcile, and that is they keep saying that Donald Trump wanted to incite the riot there, yet beginning on January 2nd, I believe it is, the Trump Defense Department kept offering the National Guard there. The president allegedly signed January 4th decree saying you could have 20,000 troops. If he was going there to incite violence, why would he send 20,000 troops to stop him from doing that?
You make an excellent point there, John. On January 2nd, the president directed the DOD to ask Capitol Police whether or not they needed assistance, National Guard assistance, and they were turned down. And we also know from testimony from former Police Chief Steve Sun, he wanted National Guard, but was turned down because of optics. Where do you think those optics came from? Those optics objections. They came directly from the political leadership in the Democratic Party in the House, which rises up and answers only to one person, and that is Speaker Nancy Pelosi.
Yeah, amazing.
Congressman, while we're talking about this primetime show that's going to be on tomorrow night, this was supposed to be a fact-finding mission, a way to achieve some type of justice and get some answers about things, get to the bottom of what happened. But displaying this on primetime television, to me, those two things don't align for me. Do they for you?
No, they don't. And it's frustrating that the mainstream media will use this opportunity to go after President Trump. Look, when my friends and I, including Steve Scalise, got shot at by a crazed gunman who was screaming healthcare while he was firing at us, he was inspired by the rhetoric coming from people like Nancy Pelosi back then, who said Republican policies were killing people. And Bernie Sanders, too. And not one time did I or any of my colleagues blame Bernie Sanders or Speaker Pelosi for the violent activity that was perpetrated by one crazed individual. And President Trump is not to blame for what happened on January 6th. It's those who wrote the law that are to blame.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the story that most Americans understand, but they're going to be sold something else. I got to remind people, there never needed to be a Hollywood production for the 9/11 Commission.